I'll admit, I was expecting the Dual Hearts video to be one of my worst performances, but it seems like quite a few of you are genuinely interested in seeing games beyond the action sports, so thank you to everybody who came around for that. I'm no stranger to snowboarding games. I haven't played nearly as many of them as I have skateboarding, but I think I'm more comfortable with them than I am with most other things. About 2 months ago, I took a look at the original SSX trilogy for the PS2, and that created some unfinished business, so today we're going to take a look at SSX On Tour for the PS2 and PSP, and SSX Blur for the Wii. If you're new here, this video isn't a deep breakdown or a documentary or anything like that. Other channels already do that. This is just me talking about my personal experiences. If you've been watching these videos for a while, and thank you for sticking around. I recognize a lot of consistent names in the comments, and a few of you have really been here for a long time, so an extra thank you to you guys. Let's get started. SSX On Tour, developed by EA Canada for the PS2 and Montreal for the PSP in 2005, is a tech fantasy snowboarding game probably most well known for how divided the opinions are. This would be the very last entry that lead programmer Bob Siliker would work on before moving on to the Skate series. We know and love the work of Siliker around here. He contributed to the development of Def Jam Fight for New York as well as Fight Night 2004. Aside from Bob, I want to take a second to spotlight the role that doesn't ever get a lot of attention. The lead lighter, as in the person who directs the in-game lighting, was somebody named Robin Court. Court's first credit is as a special thanks in MTV Sports Snowboarding, followed by a 3D art job on Pure Ride. Later on, Court served as the lead world designer on Dark Summit, a track artist for the PS2 Sledstorm reboot, and then after this they went on to do the world art for Need for Speed Carbon and the lighting for Skate 1. That's a mysteriously prolific art career. The first two credits raise questions like, what was the thanks for, and did you do something for the first game that landed you your job on the second? Aside from that, 66 people who worked on SSX 3 came back for On Tour, so it's definitely a direct sequel. I first played this game way back on my brother's GameCube, and I remember having a pretty good time. On Tour was actually the first SSX game I ever played, and I put a good amount of time into it. But it's been many years since then and my thoughts have changed a lot, so this should be interesting. The career mode, or the tour as it's called here, is a hell of a lot different than SSX 3 and totally unrecognizable compared to the rest of the series. Instead of picking from a well-established SSX character, we get to create our own. After doing that, we get to see the tour map for the first time. I absolutely loved the Own the Mountain career in SSX 3, so it is a little disappointing to see the open world elements removed. But in place of that is a much larger variety of events and challenges. Aside from the traditional races and slope style and stuff, this game brings back some of the goals from SSX 3 like Big Air and collectibles. There's a wide variety of other things to do, like grind rails for a certain distance, get a certain amount of time in the air before the clock runs out, or perform so many monster tricks, and a few others. The first few events are what you use to get your first rank on the leaderboard, and as you complete more goals, your rank will go up and you'll unlock more goals. Occasionally you'll have to participate in one of a few different SSX tours, which are multi-goal events that are much longer and more competitive than the regular stuff. Getting to certain ranks on the leaderboard will net challenges from the various characters from the previous games, and honestly I don't hate that idea. Sports are competitive, so I like the theme of you being this up-and-coming snowboarder who has to earn their spot among all of these characters that earn their spot in the same way. The old characters become boss characters without actually becoming antagonists, and that presents the whole thing with an atmosphere of good sportsmanship. This game rewards you for your efforts with cash that you can use to buy stuff like boards for better stats, different monster tricks, different cosmetics, and some extra rider bonuses that make the game a little bit easier to play overall. I'm willing to admit that it's definitely a step backward in some places, but it isn't bad. Underwhelming is the appropriate word. On the gameplay, at first I thought maybe the game engine had reverted back into the style of SSX Tricky, but once I finally got a half-decent board, the whole thing started to feel really clean. Turning while prepared for a jump no longer has as much leniency, so guiding tricks and jump feels tight and uncomfortable at times, but the trick system has been kept intact and you can still modify tricks with square like you could before. The flip and roll system is about the same as it was. It's not as fluid as 3, but it's a step above Tricky, so I'll give it a pass. The Uber tricks have been replaced with a new system called Monster Tricks, and it falls in line with most other EA games from this time period. To do a monster trick, you first have to fill your boost meter to full, and then pushing on the right analog stick means you'll do whatever monster trick you have mapped to that direction. I don't hate it, because it means I can combine modifier tricks with Uber tricks, and that couldn't be done before because the Uber tricks were done with the modifier button. And the right analog stick wasn't actually doing anything over there, so it's nice to see it given a purpose. The slow motion gameplay isn't for everybody, probably, but it didn't bother me that much. The thing that hurts this game the most is the bugs everywhere. I got stuck spinning on the ground more than once, and a lot of items have pretty messy collisions, so some things looked and felt really unnatural. But, and this is a pretty big but, those things stopped happening after I got a faster and better board. The physics engine just wasn't designed to work well with slower movement. This is evident by the new recovery system. The whole game is just designed to be picked up and played very quickly. The last major part of the gameplay is the skiing. It's just the exact same game but on skis. Truth be told, I actually really like alpine ski racing, so I'll have to cover the Bode Miller games at some point, but it really doesn't add anything deep or meaningful to this game. Visually, I actually really like the style change. The composition book artwork and the punk rock vibe of the whole thing works really well. It reminds me of Stride gum, Sobe drinks, and cans of Axe body spray. It reminds me of watching the original YouTube hits like Hot Kool-Aid, The iPod Human, and the amazingly stupid parody songs from Computer Nerd 01. Seeing the visuals again after so many years really is a hit of nostalgia that sparks memories from my childhood. The style is the most memorable part of the game, and it's something that I've kept in the back of my mind for years. Putting that aside, the adult me really has to commend the map designers here for their work on this. Even though the world elements are gone and some of the collision is weird, the maps themselves are still massive and full of secrets, collectibles, shortcuts, and the loading screen even gives you hints on where to look for some things. There's a lot of style mixed in just everywhere, all over the place, and the riders still look just as good as they did. I know it's my nostalgia taking over, but there's honestly something really classic about the overall look of this game. The GameCube version has a couple of Mario characters to play as, and the PSP version is a little bit bit-crushed, but overall the visuals are universally solid. The soundtrack is, in traditional fashion, really good. Very big, sitting strong at 41 songs in total. This is one of my favorite soundtracks from any of these games, and for good reason. There are appearances from Goldfinger, Billy Talent, Avenged Sevenfold, Dio, Queens of the Stone Age, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Scorpions, Paul Wall, Herbalizer, and a lot more. I was listening to this soundtrack years after I quit playing the game, so I give it credit for the staying power. I'll leave a link to the whole thing in the description. Finally, the extra footage in this game is very interesting. When I started playing this again to make this video, the first thing I noticed was the big extras at the bottom of the menu, and the standout option in that was videos. At first, it was just a commercial for Burnout, but then out of nowhere came these super weird MTV2 transition scenes, and honestly, I kind of love that. They have absolutely no reason to be there, but they're there anyway, and it's a fun change of pace. Life is really short, so I appreciate this a lot. I probably won't come across another set of videos as strange as this one, so that's one more weird experience I can tack into my memories. With all that out of the way, I'll go ahead and give the PS2 version of SSX On Tour a rating of 7 out of 10. It's a far cry from being as good as SSX3 or Tricky, but I would rather play On Tour than the first game any day of the week. That is mostly attributable to it being a game from my childhood, but the analytical side of me recognizes that there is actually a good game here. Yeah, some of the weird bugs and design quirks are a bit of a kick in the groin, especially after playing SSX3 recently, but it didn't completely tarnish my outlook. I don't have to hate a game just because it wasn't as good as another one. It's fun, and there are two scenarios where this game fits in perfectly. If you've never played an SSX game before and you're looking to jump in with something a little bit easier, or if you're looking for a game that you can quickly jump into for some fast fun. If you stand behind your love of 3 or Tricky enough to be absolutely fucking astonished by this game and you hate it and you just never want to look at it again, then nothing I said is going to change your mind. It's understandable to be upset when a series you enjoy produces something considerably more disappointing. The reason I don't feel that way is because I keep my expectations ulteriorly low, especially after some of the stuff I've played like Skateboard Madness, BMX XXX, MTV Sports Skateboarding, and the PS2 port of Proving Ground. I've also got a few more genuinely terrible games planned for the near future. So with games like On Tour, I stay positive. I recommend checking it out. It's worth it for anybody who likes snowboarding games and just wants something easier and more convenient. Before I move on, I want to take a second and give the PSP version of On Tour a rating of 9 out of 10. It actually makes a lot more sense for the PSP to not include the open world, but putting that aside, it is identical to the console counterpart, and it just makes more sense as a PSP game overall. I know I didn't dig too deeply into it, but for the sake of reducing redundancy, I didn't really want to go through the entire thing again. The most I can say is that the controls, while different, do a really good job despite having less available buttons than even the GameCube version. I've seen the kind of butchering that PSP ports of console games usually got, and this is masterful by comparison. If I had played this version as a kid instead of the GameCube version, I probably would have taken better care of my PSP in the long run. Next up, SSX Blur, developed by EA Montreal in 2007. This was one of the many tragic attempts at taking a great series and converting it into something that you can play with a motion controller. The lead designer, Eric Chartron, also worked on Skate It for the Wii, as well as the PSP port of On Tour, but those aren't really his most interesting credits. Chartron was the lead level designer for Dead Space 2, Mass Effect 3, and most recently Guardians of the Galaxy from 2021. There are other games mixed into that, but those are the ones that stood out to me the most. Funny enough, a giant portion of this dev team went on to work on Army of Two, and that's a trilogy that's definitely worth taking a look at in the future, but it's totally unrelated to this. Unlike On Tour, I never played this game when I was young. Truth be told, I didn't even know it existed until I was an adult. I never heard about it or saw it, so that made me a little bit extra curious for this video. Just like with Skate It, this game is designed to be played entirely with the motion controls, so I had to put together a comfortable control scheme in Dolphin. The idea is the same thing, where the right analog stick and the D-pad handle all of the major movement, and the buttons are mapped to the various buttons from the Wii Remote and the Nunchuck. I also had to disable Motion Plus because that was causing a lot of really weird issues. So before I even talk about the game itself, I have to complain about something. I understand the gimmick of wanting to use the motion controls, that's fine. But this was a series on the GameCube 2 times already before. Why not just fucking let the player use the GameCube controls? They worked, they were comfortable. It didn't have to be the primary control style, but just not having the option at all is a huge drag. The career mode here is actually a take on Own the Mountain from SSX 3. We've returned to picking one of the available riders to play through each of the events, except the riders themselves look absolutely terrible. What the fuck happened to Mac? That's not Mac, that's not even close to Mac, that's just sad. Events are spread out between 3 different mountain peaks, and the ultimate goal is just hold the #1 spot on the leaderboard. The variety of events is more similar to SSX On Tour than it is to 3, so there's a hell of a lot more open world challenges spread throughout every area, and there's more stuff to do. The cash system is gone, and in place of that, you now unlock boards and skis just by completing challenges. Occasionally, you'll be invited to compete in a tournament event, similar to the previous games. Winning the tournament usually awards you with a few set skill points and a bonus point that you can allocate to whatever you want. It's not a very complicated career, but it's pretty long, and there's a beauty to the simplicity of the formula. The gameplay is pretty similar to SSX 3, but with forced motion controls. When you're on the ground, the control stick and the nunchuck can be used to turn, and tapping the C bumper will do a pivot. You can do boosts by holding the Z trigger, and holding B will prep and pick up a snowball and throw it. And honestly, I don't even know why you can throw snowballs, because the opponents in this game are fish paste. The races are some of the easiest I've played in any snowboarding game so far. Once you're in the air, you can perform various tricks by holding the Z trigger and swinging the Wii Remote and the nunchuck in different directions. You can spin, flip, and roll by flicking the Wii Remote, and you have to land complicated flips by pressing the A button while still in the air. The auto-correction in the air looks terrible, and sometimes it's very delayed. Uber tricks make a return, and you can pull those off by holding the A button and doing some literal actual Harry Potter shit. This is where I stopped having fun and started getting sad. Who the fuck designed these wacky-ass motions for the Uber tricks? Some of these are ridiculous. Hey, you want to do a special trick? Then wave your arm around in a 3-line 2-loop box motion with a short window of time. This is what I mean when I say the motion controls were shoehorned. The Uber tricks here aren't some cohesive and revolutionary system that made us think differently about games. They're a messy amalgamation of what happens when gimmicks overshadow everything else. You know, something even funnier is that the Wii's other biggest gimmick was the GameCube backward compatibility. It was so important, in fact, that Nintendo themselves allowed the use of GameCube controllers in Smash Bros. Brawl and Mario Kart. Capcom took advantage of the GameCube controls for all 3 ported Resident Evil games. 3 Need for Speed games also used the GameCube controls. Fucking Daniel Craig's GoldenEye 007 had GameCube controller support. The simple fact is that there was no excuse to not include the GameCube controls, and they existed previously in the series. Their lack of existence hurts this game tremendously. It's not even that the game is hard, or that my emulated controls don't work, because they work fine and the game works. So if I could make it work after the fact with hacky emulator remapping, why the fuck couldn't it have been done normally? This is a problem that I have with a lot of different Wii games that I'll talk about at some point. Visually, huge step backward. All 4 of the games that preceded this felt like they had cleanliness and professionalism. This game belly flopped off of a high cliff directly into shovelware territory. The character designs are atrocious. They look worse than most PS2 games, and the style of it is just dead. That's the best word to describe it. This game is a very dead and lifeless experience. The power-ups look dull, the mountain itself is static and boring and not designed very well, well, the tricks all have horribly distorted names, and honestly, you can just see the series dying here. It's breathing through an iron lung to survive. It isn't so bad that it causes a headache, but it is hard to look at, and it's a cheap destruction of everything that made the other games great. I think EA noticed that and they didn't have any faith in this game, because the soundtrack is composed entirely by one group. Yep, this is one of those few and rare action sports games from after the 90s that doesn't have a licensed variety soundtrack. It was all produced by a group called Junkie XL, and it isn't bad, but it doesn't fit in with the game, like, at all. It sounds more like shit you would find somewhere buried in the YouTube royalty-free copyright music library. The bulk of it is simple patterns, repetitive noises, and funky, twangy octane shit that would work a lot better for literally any generic car racing game. It's not a swing and a miss, it's a series of foul balls. They hit, they just didn't go where they should have gone. Finally, there is no footage of anything, so I'll go ahead and give SSX Blur a rating of 5 out of 10. It could have been a good game. It could have been a good SSX game. It could have had GameCube controls. It could have used the original character designs. It could have had a better mountain designer. But what it could have been doesn't matter, because what it is mediocre. The game itself works. There aren't any major game-breaking bugs or anything like that. It's just missing all of the charm, passion, cleanliness, and, personality that made the rest of the series so good. It's missing a comfortable control scheme for the average player who didn't want to feel like an idiot swinging their arms around. It's missing proper direction and a sense of focus. Instead of telling you how weak I think it is, I'll just let the weak-ass EA big splash screen do the talking.
EA Sports Big.
Did you see how pathetic that was? Even the fucking splash screen was depressed. I'm sure somebody out there somewhere probably had a lot of fun with this game, but this is a hard pass for me. There are a lot of great examples of how a new development team can take over an old series, make it their own, and it still kicks ass. SSX Blur is an example of exactly how not to take over a series. It's bastardized at best, and outright ugly at worst. Worse yet, it wasn't developed by some third-party indie studio like Robomoto and Pro Skater 5. It was a full game from an in-house EA team that had 2 whole years to make it work. It feels like self-sabotage for the sake of not having to develop another SSX game. I don't recommend playing it unless you have a Wii and you really like the motion controls, but even then, if you've ever played any other entry in the series, you probably won't have a great experience. I'm glad to be done with it, but still sad to know that this isn't the only game from a popular series that was butchered and brutalized for the Wii's motion controls. We've still got a whole swamp to wade through. Now that I'm done with that, I've had a wild hair up my ass for the last week, so it's time to dig back into my obsession with fighting. But I also want to step out of my comfort zone and into a kind of fighting that I've never been particularly fond of. The next video will be 5 UFC fighting games. The only UFC game I have ever played before that is Undisputed 2009, and that one won't be making it into the next video, so the experience will be pretty blind for me. That said, I have a lot of thoughts about the UFC itself, and this is a great opportunity to talk about some of that. I don't know if anybody in the audience is a UFC fan, but if you are, then I hope I can keep it entertaining. So until next time, thank you, and have a nice day.